It's funny how the colors of the real world only seem really real when you vidi them on a screen. Alex from A Clockwork Orange. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Quote, it's funny how the colors of the real world only seem really real when you vidi them on a screen. Alex from A Clockwork Orange.
I think the 2025 is the 54th anniversary of Stanley Kubrick's filming of Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, is a novella, and we've talked a little bit in the past about how you can come to a movie too late, and the movie doesn't have the impact that you think it should, which is a kind of a refreshing idea, because what it means is that now you have to look at the merits of the film. You have to look at the film and see if it truly holds up. Now, for the better part of 4.5 decades that I've been alive, that I've been aware, I've heard of A Clockwork Orange as this masterpiece. And I've seen the movie without ever having truly seen it. I've seen the images of the film are part of the cinematic landscape. It's a film that's referenced so often, and it's a very polarizing film. I knew that going in, but I think, and although I might have to, go back on one of my mantras in watching movies and in doing this, the idea of watching a film in the context of the times in which it's created. Something like this is almost impossible to do that with, because the cinematic landscape has become so, in some ways, explicit in its depiction of violence, in its depiction of satire, in all of the things that I was always told A Clockwork Orange excelled at. So having watched it, having seen so much of it for so long, and only now seen it completely from beginning to end, I can honestly say it's a good movie, but I really don't think it's the masterpiece that a lot of people have claimed it to be, in particular because it's from a filmmaker whose masterpieces stand head and shoulders above this. I know it's almost blasphemy to talk movies and to not either submit to the cult of A Clockwork Orange. I recognize that, but I gotta say, the things that work and the things that don't work for me, and this is not a film that I think stands up. Maybe it did, and I would say most likely it did in 71. But today, I think some of the choices are glaringly wrong. So that being said, I'm interested in your take on this, and I'm interested in either the agreement or the disagreement that we are about to have. I kick it over to you.
I want to hear you elaborate on that, because I'm interested in the argument you're making.
Well, part of the thing is,
I get the counter take. Like, it's, I mean, with every fucking film, it's going to be, there are a few paths. There, it's like fucking Stairway to Heaven. There are two paths you can go by.
Yeah.
So it's like, either you're like, okay, this is I get it. This is good. I agree with it. Whatever the film is, or else it's like I don't. And or if if the world, so to speak, thinks this is a great movie, you can always say, yeah, I have a different take. I'm gonna say this movie sucks. How about that? You know what? Godfather, piece of shit. Fuck it. I said it.
Yeah.
You can do that, right?
Yeah.
Very easily. Okay. Now I want to know. I'm interested in this idea of like maybe these choices worked in its time, but they don't work anymore today. Tell me why.
I think the problem with the film, at least that I have, is that it's going for a certain level of comedy. I mean, I think it's trying to serve two masters, and it's. I think Burgess's novella, and I can't be sure. This would be really interesting to do on an episode that I proposed about film adaptations on what a filmmaker's obligation to the original source material is in achieving something. Like, you know, and Kubrick is notorious with his rendering of Stephen King's The Shining. Great film, but completely different from the novel and missing so much of the heart of what Stephen King argues. This is Stephen King arguing what Kubrick would put up on screen. And you have to agree with Stephen King at that point because it's his original idea. It's his original book. What's that?
You don't do that. You don't have to.
No, wait a minute. No, yeah, you do. You do. Because
you don't.
No, wait a minute. I'm not done. I'm not done. You do have to give credence to Stephen King and his original idea of what was what the original intention and the idea of the story was. Now, does it mean that Kubrick's film is not a masterpiece? I never said that. But you do have to recognize that the film that was made is not necessarily the idea or deviates so greatly from what King originally intended. And from what I've heard, I have to give Stephen King, I have to say that Stephen King is correct in his criticism of the adaptation as far as adapting or bastardizing what his original book was. I mean, it's true. Jack Nicholson is the wrong actor for the story that Stephen King originally intended. Jack Nicholson is crazy right from the get-go.
Yes, and I agree with that point about not there's, and I don't want to get too far into that, but the whole point of Stephen King's shit and people who follow Stephen King on this and is say that Jack Nicholson, the book shows how someone can go crazy in that environment. But Kubrick's film, according to this argument, in Kubrick's films, Nicholson there are already flashes of that craziness, so it's like he has nowhere to go. So by the time he goes crazy at the end, it's kind of like, so what? Because he was already crazy, seemingly, right? Okay, I buy that argument.
Yeah,
that argument makes sense to me. I don't have to agree with fucking Stephen King just because I buy that argument.
I'm not talking about agreeing with a finished product. I mean, I'm not saying The Shining isn't a masterpiece. I think it's of the 13 films that he made.
It's kind of like whenever someone does an adaptation, and we talked about this, and I'm not like necessarily trying to prove a point to you. I'm just stating a different position because what we talked about in that context is also like the adaptation that whatever fanboy director of Stephen King, whatever adaptation he did, it was just an adaptation of Stephen King, and therefore it had no real room to like be great, because all it could be was a motion picture of the book.
Yeah.
Whereas Kubrick's, by defying Stephen King and by doing his own fucking thing, it now has a life of its own that he created out of his vision, because he's adapting it. It's not, oh, I'm gonna be fucking faithful to the book. Like, people can say, fuck Kubrick for doing that. That's fine. But it's kind of like, it's an adaptation, and it's Kubrick. He's going to do whatever the fuck he wants to do with it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I mean, to him, it did. It's up to everyone else to decide how they feel about it. But just because Stephen King wrote the book and the book came out before the movie does not mean that you have to agree with fucking Stephen King. Like, fuck Stephen King just as much as you can say fuck Kubrick. Like, fuck them both. Whatever. It's very arbitrary. Go on.
Well, okay. So the point that I'm making, though, is in reference to this, I don't think Anthony Burgess's original novella, and I haven't read it. I'm interested in reading it now, especially since it's a novella, probably 150 pages. It shouldn't take more than a few hours. I think it would be an interesting dive and an examination of how things can either change or be manipulated, adapted, or bastardized, if that's the case. And Burgess notoriously, he had a problem with the ending of this film, but also he had a problem with the fact that Clockwork Orange to him was just a lesser literary creation of his. So, I mean, you'd have to take a deep dive into to finding out more about that. But my point is, I don't. What doesn't work in the film for me is it kind of dances with a comic element without diving deep enough in it to make a bolder statement. I think if there was comedy in here, and if he was going for comedy, he would have had to make it would have to have been more offensive. It would have had to have been more daring, and instead it's except for the very end when Alex is eating in the when he's being fed by the minister of defense, or whoever, the minister of propaganda, whoever that fucker is, that face that he makes, that's the only moment where it's actually funny, where there's and I think if Kubrick was making a full head-on attack on British attitudes towards violence, reform, teenage angst, and teenage rebellion, it could have been much grander. Maybe it was at the time, but it doesn't stand the test of time. For a movie to be great, it really has to maintain a certain level of thrill and excitement as you watch it over and over again. This is 71. In 68, 67, 69, you were seeing Arthur Penn with Bonnie and Clyde. Groundbreaking. Not a movie that I particularly care for of now. Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, 68. A film that I think stands up. The fact is that these three movies, they play into a certain level of sexuality. In this case, violent sex, rape. All three films deal with violence. They deal with sexual violence. They deal with greed and a certain sense of pessimistic humanity. I think all three films do. And the problem is that with Kubrick's film, I feel that the majority of it is directed towards the base reptilian excitement of violence and tits.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, in a weird way, the mockery that it makes of violence. I mean, the rape scene in the beginning of the film with the rape of Adriana Corsi and the beating of her husband. Many people have made note of how disturbing it is because of the dancing and the singing in the rain. And I mean, a home invasion is a horrible thing to depict on film as it is. But the way it's played, I think that's brilliant. The rest of the film just seems to me to be violence for violence sakes, with an idea of what it should be, but not a successful execution. Yes, the film is violent, and it's violent in a way that had not been seen on screen before this. So I understand its importance. I'd be a fucking moron if I didn't recognize the importance of A Clockwork Orange in opening up the possibilities of violence on screen. But I don't think that it... I think the violence is the least problem with it. I think it's everything that goes around it. And number one, I don't understand the world that it's creating. And what I mean by that is it was a future. But I never got the sense that it was a true dystopian future. It's been called a dystopian look at the future. Maybe it's because dystopian futures have always been far more grim, far darker. But the bigger part of it for me is all you do is follow Alex and his droogs and maybe one other gang and the prison. You never get a sense of the world that exists around him. Are they a marauding gang? Are they a single marauding gang, or are they numerous marauding gangs? Is crime rampant in this society, or is this kind of an isolated thing? I don't think the world that Kubrick creates gives you a good enough understanding of the sickness that it's depicting. I guess I don't see the extreme there. I don't understand. I think there's a lot missing from the film. There's a lot that's good about the film, in particular, the set design, the costumes, and Malcolm McDowell's performance. But I don't know if it's in service of a greater because I think there's a statement being made here, but I don't think it's being sold as well as it should be. I don't think it's as complete as it needs to be.
I like that. I like the not seeing the sickness. Go on.
Yeah. That's basically that's where I'm at. That's where I stand with it. So it's like I don't know what I'm watching, and that's a flaw. That's a fatal flaw. I think it's of the 13 films that he's made, I've seen 9. This is the weakest one for me. The only 2 that I haven't seen of the major works are Barry Lyndon, Lolita, and then Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss are the 2 films that he did early in his career that I think he even disavowed. So that's my understanding of Kubrick and where I bring it. And I do find at least probably half of the films that I have seen, I do consider masterpieces.
I mean, that's I like that idea of like is because I think there are a couple different themes that he's working with that are part of the story. I haven't read the book either, but they seem foundational to the subject matter. So the idea of like you not being able to see the how Alex and his story and his group, his gang and his behaviors and his family and all that is like a part of a larger fucked up, like what is it about it? I get it. Like what is it that's dystopian about it? There's one of the themes I think is, and Kubrick loves this theme, is like when you look at, and you can see this in his whole, let's look through his filmography. If you think about Dr. Strangelove, which we haven't talked about extensively, where you talk about a Space Odyssey from a different angle, but similarly.
Yeah.
The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut. He's looking at, I think, like institutions, how institutions function, how the individual fits into those institutions, and the question really is the setting more brutal than the subject? Who's fucked up? Is it the individual or is it the fucking society or the setting or the institution that they're in? Is it, are any of these people in Doctor Strangelove? Yeah, they're fucked up. But it's kind of like, are all these fucked up people together collectively making something fucked up? Or is the thing itself fucked up and these are all little fucked up atomic parts of it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can get that. Yeah.
And I think that is, you look at that in Eyes Wide Shut, when Sidney Pollack is just kind of like, she's a whore, or whatever the fuck he says. It's kind of like this world that he's in, and you know he's got his shit at home, but this world is like, which is more fucking toxic, and they're all fucking toxic together. You can expand on that in all aspects of Kubrick's filmography, and you can say, yeah, well, The Shining, is Jack Nicholson fucked up, or is that place, like, what's the relationship between the setting and the subject? And here, it's like, yeah, Alex is a fucking scumbag. And sickness is just a great way for you to describe it, because it's like, is he just a symptom of something larger, where these gangs exist because, like, are they acting just like, where does it come from? What's creating that?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
And the society that wants, like his family, that wants to ignore. They say that, or there's an expression that says, like, the black sheep of the family is the one that's like the most sensitive one, and B, the one that fucking doesn't want to, like, go along with the bullshit of the fucking, like, the narrative of the family, where, like, a lot of times the black sheep is the one that really calls out the bullshit of the facade of the family narrative. And so everyone else must now shun or go against that black sheep because they're like, you cannot disrupt our fucking storyline. We're a happy family. Even if we're not happy, we're a family. We're this, we're that. Everything's okay. Don't remind us of how fucked up we are. And Alex here and all of those teenagers with all their fucked up behavior, which is ultra violence, beatings, rapes, home invasions, all of that is it kind of pulls the lid up, or it pulls back the curtain to be more Lynchian and more Oz. It pulls back the curtain on on society. And so the thing is like, okay, now what we need to do is we need to put you through a deeper part of the system. We have to reflect back all your fucked up shit on you, and we have to control you because we're all out of control. And so what do we need to do to prevent us from all being out of control? We need to add more control. And I think that's the dystopian aspect, is that you see the cure, and the cure is fucking like, is the cure worse than the fucking illness, right? The Ludovico technique, which is to clamp Alex's eyes open. So there's, for those of you who don't know what this film is about, the film takes place in some future, but obviously that future looks like the 60s to us because it's our past. And Alex is the leader of this gang of juvenile delinquents who are interested in sexual and physical violence. And he's caught. You see him on this night of this crime spree or whatever, and then ultimately he's caught, goes to prison, and they want to cure him of his violent tendencies and his sexual predatory tendencies. So they clamp his eyes open and they make him watch movies and clips of violence and sexual violence, and they condition him. Basically, it's behavior modification, it's mind control, it's conditioning. They condition him to become nauseated by violence and sexuality and sexual violence, but it to a certain degree, it just looks like sexuality in general.
Well, that's the easier way to do it, to just break them up all sexual,
yeah,
to neuter them.
Yeah, no nuance, just boom. Yeah. And so they demonstrate that they can abuse him and he'll just take it, because anytime he wants to retaliate or act out, he feels sick. Anytime if he's presented with a naked woman, he will feel sick. And so then it's like the pre-conditioning and the post-conditioning. And in a weird Taxi Driver kind of way, he goes from being seen as this like monster to being seen as this victim. And I think Kubrick himself was in a way trying to do the Ludovico technique on the viewer in his own way.
Well, that's an interesting take, yeah. Okay.
Where what are these motherfuckers? I'm going to show these shocking versions of sexuality and mockery of sexual violence, and what's going to be the response. In the film, the idea is like, you should be made to feel sick by these things because that means you're healthy. If it turns you on, you're fucked up. If you think it's cool, you're fucked up. So I see that as like the second kind of the first piece about the question of institutions versus the setting versus the subject. I like your point about not really seeing how pervasive it is. I can also see that it's kind of like you have to make that, the viewer has to make the leap. And I think the family is kind of like this intermediate kind of, going back to the black sheep part, where it's kind of, you see those parents that like their kids are all fucked up and they're like, oh, well, not little Johnny, because, you know, he's a good boy, but Johnny's robbing banks and doing all this crazy shit. So is the dystopia, like, to go back to that, is it's kind of, you could say that, well, it's not dystopian enough, but like, look outside and does it look like a dystopia? But all the shit that's in this movie is out there, like right outside our window. So it's, what does dystopia look like? In movies and in media, it's supposed to be, you know, the idea is that it's supposed to be everything that Donald Trump wants it to be. But is it Wall-E? Is it fucking 1984? Is it V for Vendetta? Is it Star Wars? You know what I mean? Like, the list goes on and on and on. Or is this just a fucking slice of life of one fucking family with their own little fucking dystopia that's part of a larger dystopian society that looks or tries to look pretty normal? You know what I mean? Like, what if the future doesn't look like the future? What if the future just looks like however it happens to fucking look?
Yeah.
And it's fucked up, but we only see Alex as, this isn't society, that's just him. That's them. It leads to the greater question of like, right-wingers don't see society, they only see individuals, supposedly, until, you know, when it's, as long as it's convenient. And if you take that view of like, well, this isn't a societal problem, this is an individual problem, then we can just keep taking those individual things and we can fix them institutionally, as long as we don't prevent, we can only punish, because that serves our narrative. So I can see both sides of that argument of being like, well, I think your argument is persuasive in terms of like, show me the dystopia. What I'm saying is, and what I'm saying that I think Kubrick, I don't even think he's doing it. I just think that that's my take.
Yeah.
So I can't defend Kubrick against that, because it's hard to see. You can't see my perspective on the screen. You can only like derive that perspective by saying, well, what I said. Is it that dystopia looks normal, and that's what makes it so dystopian? In the Matrix, you can say, well, the dystopia looks normal because you know that the Matrix is there to make it look normal. In there, like, so it's almost like you have to see it and know that everyone's like from the outside, and everyone inside the film is pretending that they don't see it. But you have to know that in order to make my point like hold, but you don't see that. So I think your point on that part is solid. I think my interpretation, like, or my questioning of like seeing is like, dystopia looks so-called normal, and the idea is to make it seem normal.
Mm-hmm.
I think my point makes sense, but I just think that it's harder to prove in this movie because I don't think it is provable. Going now to the Ludovico technique aspect of it, it's kind of I think it's interesting that you said like the violence is not the problem, and in that sense, I do feel, and this might also be the effect of like where films and where media has gone. I do feel that to a certain degree, this film doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
It's weird because there are things that we watch where we say nowadays this kind of film could not have been made now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a catch-22 type of thing because you look at this film and you're like, well, how can we put ourselves in the mindset of the late 60s and to see these things and go, yeah, this is fucked up. Like, it is fucked up still to watch it because of what you're watching. But the depiction of it itself is not that extreme. The subject and the fact that you're seeing it, and you're seeing it in the context of being kind of, at times, kind of zany, and that's where the comedy part comes in, because, like, yeah, it's like, it's fucked up, but it has to be so fucked up that you laugh inadvertently.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I don't really laugh at this movie, you know? At the same time, I'm not like, oh my fucking God,
yeah.
oh.
Well, that's the thing. I wasn't offended. I wasn't offended by it in any way. I just looked at it and I was like, this just isn't doing anything for me. It doesn't. It's not having the effect. And I've listened to people talk about the power of the movie, and you also have to take into account the people who talk about it. Oftentimes, British, English writers, directors, and actors who this film was banned in England for, 40 some odd years, 30 some odd years until Kubrick's death. You couldn't see it in the theater. There were copycat crimes, and there were threats against Kubrick's life, threats against his family. People were showing up at his home in much the same way as they showed up to the writer. And people are stupid. People,
Yes.
in a sense, the idea of, will it create copycat crime? Yeah, it'll create copycat crime. But that's not reason enough to stop art from being created. I would never argue for censorship in not allowing a film like this to be made, in the same way that I wouldn't say Taxi Driver shouldn't be made, or Taxi Driver shouldn't be seen anymore. Or The Wild Bunch, or Unforgiven, or any other film that Michael Haneke's Funny Games. That's a seriously disturbing film. The fact of the matter is that there are people out there who damn near anything is going to trigger them. So it's not necessarily this, but
especially if they have an audience.
Yeah, yeah, and with social media being what it is today, and the 24-hour news cycle, there is an audience for everything. So extremism is something. Now, if you take the Basketball Diaries, would Columbine have occurred without the Basketball Diaries? Probably. They might not have wore trench coats. They might not have gone in there, imagining themselves in slow motion. Maybe they would have. I don't know. I mean, it's the power of the image is a great thing, but for the majority of us who are grounded in reality, we know that this is not where we take it. There's a serious people who are disturbed are going to find an outlet. People who are seriously fucked up and are going to commit these kinds of violent acts are going to do so with or without Alex or Travis Bickle or any number of Even vigilantes like a Paul Kersey. These because there is a sickness in society. Movies don't. Movies only provide an excuse. Movies are not the reason for this shit to occur. It doesn't. Some people, let's just be honest, some people are so fucking bereft of creativity that all they know how to do is to copy. But if a gang...
And also all they know to do is to destroy.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If a gang is going to go out there and if a gang is going to go out there and gang rape a young woman, they're going to do it. Them kicking somebody in the stomach and singing in the rain while they do it is not. It's not a reflection. It's not a true inspirational reflection on Kubrick's film. It's a matter of people being so bereft of imagination.
I mean, that's Gene Kelly's fault.
Yeah. I can't subscribe to an idea that that art should be banned because a handful of people. Imagine all the people who have taken great inspiration from what Kubrick has done here. Because although the film doesn't work for me, there are a number of filmmakers who cite it for the power that it had and had when they first watched it. I don't know.
I mean, there are parts of it that are iconic.
Yes, there's so much about this that are iconic. Just that slow pulling out in the beginning as Alex sits there, that one eyelash drinking milk. I mean, there are so many moments in this movie that are the language of cinema.
Yeah.
And so much of it has been replicated in the following 5 decades. So you can't be dismissive of the film. I'm not dismissive of the film. I'm just talking about what does and doesn't work, and the
you're
idea
breaking down pieces of it that and that's why I was very interested in, because you came on very strong. So I said, yeah, let's I'm really interested in terms of like, how does it work in or not work based on the time. Versus some films, it's kind of like going back to the fucking Lynch Oz thing, like The Wizard of Oz. And no, I have not seen fucking Wicked, but like just looking at the Wizard of Oz clip, even if you just look at stills, and you don't know shit about the movie, you look at stills from Wicked and you look at stills from the Wizard of Oz, and one looks fucking like more striking than the other.
Yeah.
Because Wicked looks like a sea of other bullshit, and the Wizard of Oz does not. The Wizard of Oz looks bizarre,
but it also looks original, and that's the thing. Wicked, Return to Oz, anything that deals with that world is a replication and it's a photocopy of what has come before it and has been altered.
Return to Oz, I think, is an adaptation that does kind of take a darker turn.
Much darker turn, but there is still the basis of... There is no way of being completely original when adapting something that has already been created. You're stepping off... That's not to say that there's no reason to do it, because I think Return to Oz, if I remember correctly, from what I remember about it, is a fascinating film. I mean, it goes into a really dark place, but it also goes farther into the illustrations that were in Frank L. Baum's original book. You know, the scarecrow is like a pumpkin head, or no, that's a different character. Anyway, the point is that everything is influenced and derived from something else. There is no such thing as complete and total originality.
Right.
You know, everything.
Everything's
I
in
mean,
context.
yeah, the ideas are always pulled and expanded on from something that has come before it. And I'm not faulting that. I'm not, you know, as much as we may go after Tarantino, it's that's a different argument. What we're talking about here is something that, what we're talking about here is trying to understand the power of the image. Whether this film is the masterpiece that it's considered, which I'm not one to speak on that. I'm saying it's not the masterpiece. I don't believe it to be the masterpiece that a lot of people consider it to be. Whether or not it is a masterpiece is not the point in this particular argument that we're having not even argument, but discussion we're having right now. This is a film that has stayed with us. When people, there was a long time there when television, they would do a Halloween episode, let's say a Halloween or a costume party episode. Invariably, somebody would be dressed up like Alex and the Droogs. That white jumpsuit, the cod piece, the fucking eyelash and the bowler hat and the cane. You know, it's there. But then again, that slow motion walk. How many? It's strange because that's inspired. That slow motion walk as they walk down the Thames. I think it's the Thames. That is taken from other scenes of the type. I think most explicitly the Wild Bunch, Pike and the boys walking into Mapache's small town. But how many people are copying it based on Clockwork? Because a lot of people don't, for them, that's the first time seeing it. You know, think about how much, think about the film student today who's watching Tarantino, thinking that's completely original, and how that's going to appear in their films later on.
Right.
You know, where you're watching Reservoir Dogs, and I'm like, I'd seen Reservoir Dogs before I saw The Killing. Once I saw The Killing, I was like, oh my God, this is Reservoir Dogs. You know, I mean, there's and that's part of the Easter egg hunt that you play in films. That's part of the slap in the face of what has come before, and these little games that you play in watching a movie, the rewards that you get, and that's part of the fun.
That's the fucking dialectic. That's fucking like this, and then this came after it, and this, and then this came after it. Fucking it's love and theft. It's the white boy who stole the blues. Like, it is what it is. Yeah. It's fucking Jung says, fuck you, Freud. And boom, you get whole other fucking side. Yeah. You know? So yeah. It's interesting, like because I have one more third point that I think he's playing with, and but as a side note, Kenneth Anger used popular music in his occult films. Yeah. And well, I mean, and his films are like I think they're all occult because they're all also dream, they're all magic, they're all fucking whether they're gay countercultural firework shit or fucking like 60s fucking occultism, like whatever it is. They're all indie fucking shit. Huge influence on Scorsese using popular music in his shit. Kubrick is using classical music in this fucking weird kind of punk rock.
I'm glad you bring this up. Yeah, let's go into that.
Where this idea of kind of like beauty in the midst of ugliness, and these two like the the capacity for human beings to have these cravings and yearnings for, on the one hand, the sublime, something that's going to take you to this so-called higher realm, this thing that's going to supposedly like elevate your spirit. And here it's Beethoven, and Beethoven's Ninth, Ode to Joy. This sound that like lifts you up, right? But at the same time, as human beings, to have this. I made the joke the other day. I was camping with my friends, and we're standing around the fire. We had just fucking eaten all this meat that we fucking grilled on the fire, and we were drinking alcohol. And I was like, man, doesn't this just make you like standing in front of the fire? We've just eaten all this meat. We feel rested. Don't you just want to go out and like commit atrocities together? There's something, obviously we didn't want to, and obviously we didn't do that, but it's kind of like, why the fuck do people like, where does that come from? Why is it that when you're a little boy and you see a fucking dandelion, you have the desire to kick it? Why is it that when you're a little boy, you want to just throw rocks at shit? And and I don't think it's just me. You know what I mean? Like, there's something, regardless of what that is, right? There is, and it goes back to the act of killing. It's like, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we are not like those people who are evil and capable of committing all these fucked up things. Like, human beings have the capacity for the most heinous fucking shit. Collectively, we all have that. At the most, like, going back to what you said, the reptilian brain, we all have that. We all fucking, however we would decide to justify it, is whatever. Are we evil? No. Are we capable of what can be described as evil? Yeah, of course. In the same breath, we can all fucking look at like the most beautiful thing, the Sistine Chapel, the most beautiful sunset, you know, the fucking wind over fucking like fields of wheat, and we can just like, or the person we love, and we can say like, man, like, this is so beautiful. And then we can go cut somebody's fucking head off. You know what I mean? Like, it's
extremes.
And in the same thing, like 2001, where Kubrick is like showing these fucking ape ancestors of humans or whatever, and then one throws up that fucking femur, and then it becomes this fucking space station or whatever the fuck it is, spinning through space, and it's like the sublime or the celestial or advancement, progress versus brutality, and they're connected. And I think this is one of those films that like he really plays with that, and there are shots in the film. Not only are they iconic, they're beautiful.
Many times.
When he's fighting his own, Alex is fighting his own gang, and they're flipping into the water in slow motion, and you see the way the water splashes, and the way the shots are made. Even like when he's having the sex scene, which is also made to not look like really like a real actual sex scene, because it looks fake, but it's
speeded up.
It's sped up, and he knows. I mean, obviously, Kubrick is a master at that. He knows how to create frames. He has an aesthetic sense. So then also Ludovico, where it's like, well, when you make something fucked up, but it looks beautiful, it's shot really well, but the subject matter itself is not beautiful. And it goes back to, who was it that said that, like, in a certain sense, there is no anti-war film, because all films, in the fact that they're being shot and dramatized, in a sense, they romanticize it, or they glorify it.
I think that was Godard.
Yeah, so yeah. To me, it's, I don't really concern myself with whether it's a masterpiece or not. I'm not saying you are, but like, it's, we know it's iconic. We all know that.
Yeah.
If you know about the film, you know it's iconic. If you know about films, you know it's iconic. Does it work? I think that's what you said, I think, is valid. In a sense, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, especially someone as cerebral as Kubrick, he's playing with a lot of ideas. I don't think that he would have been able to reverse engineer to be like, oh, let's start with these themes and then make a movie out of it.
Yeah.
That's why he adapts a lot of other people's shit, because he uses them as a basis, I think, to create. To me, the whole of those three aspects, the question, the setting versus the subject, the film itself as the Ludovico technique, and then the using the music as a kind of marker for that dual nature of human beings, of humanity. To me, the most interesting is kind of like the meta aspect of, like, do these images disgust you, and why? And what does that say about you? What does it say about the viewer? You know what I mean? Like, and we talked about this we talk about this a lot, but it's kind of the idea of, like, oh, this guy's cool.
Yeah.
If Alex is cool, what does that say about you?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's kind of like the other extreme is to pretend that there's this fucking moral panic, and to create and to say, like, fuck, like, we have to stop the Alexes of the world, and then at that point you become that minister guy, and then you're like, well, that guy's cool. I mean, even if you don't say he's cool, you agree on that level, and that guy is, not to create an equivalence, but, like, who's more destructive? It can be misinterpreted as there are arguments like, Richard Ramirez, in a couple of interviews, he talked about, and always distancing himself from his crimes. But he would say, like, and Manson, I think, did it in a much more
flamboyant, yeah. Well, I would say,
yes, of course, flamboyant, but also I think with his fucked up Manson logic, or his Manson non-logic, or whatever, I think he made a better case, or at least he performed a better case for it. Where it's kind of like, well, if governments and countries are fucking killing and creating all this destruction, like, why are you picking on these little individuals because they kill 3 people, or they kill 4 people, or 5 people, and then the country you live in is killing millions of people? Now, you can make that kind of argument. Obviously, where they're coming from is like, well, yeah, I did those killings, so don't fucking criticize me. Criticize the government. Let's talk about them. Like, let me out so I can kill more people. the question is like, well, is the person who's sending all these troops to go destroy, for what reason and what corporate reason and blah, 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 is that person, obviously they're not doing it for fucking, I mean, it could be, because you could potentially have active killing. Some of these people could be like serial killers in the midst, you know what I mean? Like there was serial killers in the mafia.
Yeah. No,
definitely. But it goes back to that question of like the institution versus the society. And
well, see, that's the thing with the film. It's an underlying theme in the film, society versus the individual. And like I said earlier, the film doesn't do a good enough job establishing the society that has produced this character or how he's really being dealt with. All you do, you see his mother and father who are ineffective. You don't see the neighboring communities. You see his victims, and then you see the prison. You see police and the prison, and then some of it is addressed in newspaper articles when Alex is released, and then his treatment afterwards. I like the idea of the Ludovica technique and the experiments there as a subject matter of conditioning, and because if you pay attention to all I can speak to is the American penal system, you do hear of this kind of attempt to control and rehabilitate criminals, which is in a sense to condition them through a type of psychological lobotomy, which is what's going on here. Is that possible? Is it ethical? And do you fix a situation by making somebody adhere to accepted behavior not because of moralistic reasons on their part, but because the same kind of conditioning that you would put on a dog or any other kind of wild animal? It's alluded to. What's that?
That's another level. Is that philosophical question of like free will and morality? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, is it a question of like, do you give someone the perspective so that they can make a choice, and the choice is that which is good, right?
Yeah.
To choose the good over whatever is your impulse, right? Versus the institution says, we're not interested in, and nor do we have the time to kind of like educate every person, like, or offer them this kind of choice. Our prisons are too full right now.
Yeah.
But people still need to be punished. So what we need to do is we need to basically not necessarily teach, but to re-educate, to fix it.
Yeah.
It's a problem of hardware. Well, in this case, it's a problem with the software because they're just fucking with your brain. I mean, your mind, not your brain. And so, right, that's the question. Is like, if you're doing the good because you're forced to do the good, is that good, or must it be good because the intention is to be good? And then at that point, you flip it. The opposite is like, well, if you're committing some kind of atrocity, but you're being forced to, is it still evil because you don't want to do it, but you have to do it? And the implication is that if you can get someone to do something, if you can get someone to do the good, you can also get them to do what isn't good.
See, but what you're describing right there is all in greater detail and explored more in your discussion of it than anything that is depicted on screen.
That happens quite a bit on the show.
Well, absolutely, and I think that is a failing of the film because it's addressed. It is shown without being explored. And I'm not talking about exposition. I'm not talking about go into great detail discussing it. I'm talking about show it. If you're gonna
walks in.
Yeah. If you're gonna
the guy walks in and says, I'm the doctor who's here in the film to talk about about
this is not Psycho where now the doctor's gonna come in and talk about why he's become a transvestite and why he's been murdering people over this, there's no, it's not necessary to explain Ed Gein. It's important to show. And like, there are moments there that, like, there's a moment where Alex runs into his old gang and now they're police.
They're cops, yeah.
And that's a great moment.
Yeah.
But it's not explored. And I'm not talking about what I'm saying is it's abandoned. It's an idea that is presented and then abandoned. It's a plot device that's used to punish him and beat him and in a sense a kind of cinematic karma that's being visited upon him without any kind of further exploration. And these are the problems that I have with the film, is that the film addresses ideas without exploring them. I think that's my biggest problem. It's not the violence. The violence is unappetizing. It's not fun to watch, but there is something about it on screen that makes it cinematically important. It's very strange that the violence in the film is the least problem that I have with the film. I don't have a problem with that at all. I have a problem with how everything is in relationship to the violence, and 50 years later, a film that I think my biggest problem with the film is that I think it's just maybe overrated. It's possibly overrated, but also I think admired for many of the wrong reasons. There's a lot more going on here, but it's an incomplete film. It doesn't explore the world the way Eyes Wide Shut does, or Full Metal Jacket. For pure satire, Dr. Strangelove it's just far ahead of this film. I think satire was probably the wrong way to go with this film because it's not a true satire. Now, you were talking a little bit earlier about I don't know how to address this and get into it, but what I was thinking as you were speaking and as I was watching it last night, a lot of scenes from Henry Portrait of a Killer started playing in my head as I was watching this film. And that's a really bad sign for a movie. When you're watching a movie and all you can think of is a better movie, or a movie that does what this movie is trying to do better. Now, Henry, they don't exist. The violence is parallel to one another. The violence in both films is parallel. Home invasion, the talk of the videos, I mean, maybe I'm making a leap there, but there is a better understanding of the character that's created in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Although Michael Rooker and the person who plays Otis, they're not sexy at all. They're not made to be sexy. They're truly frightening. Malcolm McDowell is sexy for the time.
Yeah, he's like a Mick Jagger.
Yeah, who was the original. There were talks before Kubrick came on board that Mick Jagger would play the part with the Stones playing the Droogs. That was one idea.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's
fucking,
yeah.
I was born in a crossfire hurricane. You know what I mean? It's fucking
Yeah.
Street Fighting Man. It's fucking Jumpin' Jack Flash. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
It's possible. But that's the thing, is like, I'm going to a different movie. As I'm watching one film, I'm being drawn into something else that I think just does it better. And it's unfair to compare the two because they're two stylistically different films. But the point that I'm making is, in this film, in Clockwork Orange, I kind of feel like, to borrow a cliche, I get the impression that Stanley Kubrick is going up to the bell, but he's not ringing it. You know, he's approaching. He's really not taking it as far as it could go. And it's weird because he exceeded the expectations and the acceptance of violence for the time. But all the other aspects of the film, he's lacking in. It's almost like the original cut of The Wild Bunch, where what the studios cut were not necessarily, it wasn't the violence. It was the backstory that gave heart and soul to the film. But given Kubrick's control over each film, I can't imagine that there's anybody else to blame but Kubrick for that failing.
So you say that it's admired for the wrong reasons. What are some of these reasons in your mind that
I think it's the type of film that when you build up a controversy, and it goes back to the idea of that which you are not allowed to see takes on a greater and more greater importance. And the fact that this film was banned, I don't even know if it was banned. Kubrick took it out of circulation. He didn't take it out of circulation anywhere else in the world, but he took it out of circulation in England. There were some copycats. I don't like when... I find it problematic when people only see the titillation and the violence. To admire this film simply because it broke ground in showing fights, a disturbing rape, murdering a woman with a giant phallic cock, I think that's very base. In a sense, that's what I mean by liking shit for the wrong reason. It's like when I was a kid and I was reading Bukowski, and other people would tell me about him, and they just liked the dirty old man. They didn't see the heart and soul of it. The problem with this film is that doesn't exist. It's only violence, without a complete exploration of both the questions that arise from the causes of violence and the dealings with violence. I think there's a better film here if they had given more exploration to the Ludovico experiment, the rehabilitation, and if they had spent more time with the philosophical questions, which you can't say that Kubrick wasn't capable of that, because you see it in other films of his.
Yeah. I mean, what society creates Alex? What's the type of society that creates Alex? And we will show that. But they will not. The people inside the society won't see the horrors that we will see in the audience, and that will show how fucked up everything is on a societal level versus just the prison level.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the prison is kind of like a metaphor, you know what I mean? Like, but No, I do see that where it's kind of like we're seeing like we're just seeing the punctuation at the end of the sentence,
Yeah.
but we don't get the sentence. We see the exclamation point, but we don't see the fuck that that comes to. Whereas we just talked. Speaking of fuck, it's like Frank Booth, in a weird way. In a weird way, I can see. You look at Blue Velvet, and Blue Velvet is
which we
made to
did
look
2 or 3
so.
episodes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So it's made to look so fucking vanilla that when you get to Frank Booth and he's like, "Oh fuck anything that moves, fucker," you're like, where the fuck does that come from? How does that exist in this world? But then you're like, of course it fucking exists.
Yeah.
Because it's this it's the dark side of this fucking fake ass fucking vanilla American dream light picket fence world.
Yeah.
Of course it exists underground. It's like the night to the day. It exists in the unconscious, of course. And all this fucking dark shit just bubbles up to the surface.
But why is that successful in Blue Velvet? Because Lynch is aware of the ideas surrounding Americana, the belief that there is safety in the 1950s, and his desire to pull back the curtain and show the great and powerful Oz, to show the darkness that underlies everything, that to show that people are hiding from a true reptilian self, that it exists and it's there and we are capable of it. And that's why Blue Velvet is brilliant. Really, really and truly brilliant.
Because, he shows, he gives it a context. So he gives it a context and a contrast.
Yeah.
Now, whereas something like, he does it in a way where it's like, well, for every fucking thermodynamics, for every action there's an equal or opposite reaction. So in this case it's an opposite. In Taxi Driver it's equal, because it's kind of like, out of this fucked up world, a fucked up person like obviously is going to emerge, and that makes sense too, because it exists in a fucked up world where everyone's all fucked up. This film, to go with your argument, is like, we're following Alex, but it's almost as if the world that he exists in is incidental, so it becomes less macro. It's just fucking Alex is fucked up, other people are fucked up too, and then the prison system is fucked up. But there is no, we see the fucking Frankenstein monster, but there's no Frankenstein that we're really getting to see. And that I do agree with that. Now, to create a Brazil, Kubrick could have done that easily.
Yeah.
Kubrick. Cool. I mean, he would end up doing it with fucking Full Metal Jacket. But the first half of Full Metal Jacket is like, well, how do you fucking create this fucked up person? Well, out of every 10 people, this system is going to crack someone.
Yeah.
And you have to go through that process of, in order to make the omelet of war, you have to fucking crack those eggs. And that's just the gateway to get to the fucking second part. Like, you're not even in the war yet. And he's creating this fucked up shit. So it is interesting that it's kind of like, whoa, like, even in fucking 2001, just to have that part about the fucking apes fighting and throwing up the bone creates a trajectory where it's like it helps to establish kind of it grounds the craziness of fucking Hal in this kind of like lineage and this fucking genealogy of violence and subjugation, to where in a sense you're kind of like, well, fuck, like, do I side with Hal or do I side with the people? You know what I mean? Like, who has the conch in this fucking what's that fucking book where the kids are all on an island and whoever has the conch has the
flies,
control?
Lord of the Flies.
The Lord of the Flies. Yeah. Who has the bone, basically? So completely, I get what you're saying with that in terms of that, and that what really I really liked the most about what you said was the aspect of the sickness. Like we see a symptom, but even that, like even greater than that, it's like, is Alex a bug in the system or is he a feature?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's it's in a sense what we described for the Richard Ramirez documentary, where we described it as an unexplored evil. Where they talk about all the shit that he did, and then just in this like almost like this montage, it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is the childhood montage, and that's why. But he's evil.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that because we're looking for something to excuse him. We're doing the opposite of what we want. We made this point then. We want the opposite for that. We want the opposite of Halloween.
Yeah.
We don't want the fucking Rob Zombie Halloween where it's like, okay, Michael Myers is fucking childhood, like blah blah blah, and then it takes away the monster. It takes away the we don't want to know that fucking Jaws, that the shark in Jaws didn't have enough fucking seals to eat, and then it went crazy or whatever.
No, I think what we're saying is simply we don't want explanation. We want contrast. I want to see what the contrast is. That's what I want to see.
I want to see the soil that the flower comes out of, no matter how ugly that flower is, and I want to see the thorns, and I want to see the petals and the thorns. So very much cinematic karma. But how do you know if it's karma if you only get the one life?
That's right.
In karma, you have to have the result of something else. So it's like its own weird fucking like Kubrick's Hays Code, where like the punishment, but there's something behind it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This film was suggested by Alan Lambert, so this is a request episode. He's a member. He became a member by donating $5 a month.
Greatly appreciated.
$5 a month, but you can do it becomes $50 a year. So you just sign up and do that. Like I know there are no fucking eggs in the supermarket, but buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. Here come the tariffs. Buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. This one's for Lamberg, Cinematic Karma, Kubrick, Dystopia. The dystopia's out there. The dystopia's in here. Watch it with us every fucking week. Till next time.